go. And we're on. Live in 3, 2, 1. All right. Welcome again. Thanks everyone for coming. We're going to talk a little bit about gardening and agriculture. There's going to be a little presentation and we're going to have a lot of questions because a lot of us want to know the same things. What can you grow around here? And what things will thrive? And what things should we not plant that will not poison us ourselves? So looking forward to hearing a lot of information. It's going to be action-packed, I'm sure. So take notes, think of all your questions, write them down, and at the end we'll have time to ask those. All right. You ready? I'll have a quick prayer and then we'll begin. Father in heaven, thank you so much for the time we could spend this afternoon learning about your second book about nature. Lord, we know that you have a plan for us. Lead us and guide us, open our minds to your calling, and Lord, help us to be ready to answer it. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, we'll turn it over to Anthony.
All right. Do we have enough children here to do an activity? Because if we have children, then we can do kind of a gardening 101 to start at the children level, which would be really good. And the let me just make push play on that. Oh, well. Did you bring the charger? Okay, we were talking earlier about charcoal, and I have children up here, and at lunch I overheard the children talking about charcoal and how much they feel about its taste. And the children didn't like the taste of charcoal. Is that right? It's not good. So, wouldn't it be great if God made charcoal taste good? Wouldn't it be nice if he did that? And actually God did. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about this real quick, and I'm going to use the children's help. And so for you adults, we're going to revisit photosynthesis. Okay, photosynthesis. What things do we need for photosynthesis? Do you know what photosynthesis is? The word synthesis means process or to use or to change. And photo means light. So what do we need for the plant to process light? What are the ingredients we need? Okay. Air. Okay, good. We have air. So children, which one of you can be air? Can you be air? Okay, you're air. So what's your name again? Kinsey? Okay, so Kinsey is air. So where would air be? Okay, everywhere. We also need what besides air? Water. Caleb, can you be water? Okay, Caleb's water. And what else do we need? Sunlight. Andrew, can you be sunlight? Nathaniel. Nathaniel, can you be sunlight? Okay, so you have to come up high because sunlight rises and gets high in the sky. What else do we need? Water. We have Caleb's water. Air and sunlight. What else do we need? We need soil, and we need what coming out of the soil? A plant. Can you be the plant? Your dress reminded me of a plant, so that's why I had you be the plant, and I had Caleb with his blue shirt be the water, and the yellow and the bright colors coming out of the sun here, and then our carbon dioxide with the dark dress. Okay, does that help you remember who is what? Now, quickly, go to your Bibles with me. Which my Bible is? Go to your Bibles with me. Let's go to creation, Genesis chapter 1. God said, let there be light. And whose light? Your light. Right away, we have light. And then on day 2, God said, let there be a firmament, which is air, in the midst of the waters. So by day 2, we have light, air, and water, the 3 things we need for photosynthesis in the first 2 days. Where do all of those things come from? From God. Remember in the Bible, over and over and over, it says God was the one who created the heavens and the earth. Okay, so there's a relationship, heavens and earth. In the first 2 days, God created the things that come from the heavens, the light, the air, and the rain or the water. Okay, those are the things that come from heaven. So first thing he created is the heavens. On day 3, he made dry land appear. And what did he put in the dry land? He put plants. He put 3 kinds of plants to be specific, but we're not going to go into that right at the moment. So we have the 3 things from heaven. Every good gift and every perfect gift comes from above and comes down from the Father of lights. Okay? So in creation, God told us something about photosynthesis. He created the 3 heaven-sent blessings. By the way, Sister White calls them heaven-sent blessings, the 3 heaven-sent blessings in a certain place. Light, air, and water. That's what she calls heaven-sent blessings. And they're needed by the plant. Yay! She has everything she needs by day 3. Now let's watch how this goes. Can this work? Can you hear me? Okay, yeah, good. Okay, so our plant here. Let me ask you, I'm going to let you choose what kind of plant you are. God made 3 kinds of plants, okay? He made the first one in Genesis chapter 1, verse 11 and 12. It says he made grass, the herb-bearing seed, or the fruit tree bearing fruit. Which one would you like to be? You want to be the seed. Okay, perfect. So you can be wheat. Okay, so you can come right over here. All right, you can face them. I'm planting you so that they can see you. Here she is, and she needs air. But she doesn't know she needs air until the sun rises. Sun rises. Okay, there's the sun. Go higher, higher, and then she needs water to survive. The Bible says in the sower and the seed that the plant withered away in the sun when it didn't have what? Water or depth of root. So if our plants are withering away, we have 2 choices. Give them more water or give them deeper roots. Those are your 2 choices. So we're going to dig deep. We're going to plant her deep. She has deep roots, but the sun still comes up. She needs water. So water, come and save her life. By the way, in the Bible, it says that the water of life, right? And then the breath of life. And then light. It says in him was life, and the life was the light of men. So life, light, water, and air are all attached to the word life in the Bible. So air comes. Now, she only needs half of you because you are carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. You're going to give her carbon. And can I have a volunteer? Thank you. You're going to be the oxide. Okay, so we have CO2. You're going to keep the carbon. So you're going to attach yourself to her. And the O2, she doesn't need, so you can tell her to go back and let the people breathe her. There goes the O2 off into the air. We're happy because we need O2 to breathe, right? Okay, the plant just now keeps carbon. Okay, and water. You're still here. And light. And light comes all the way to the plant. Come into the plant. And she hides light in a package of carbon and water. So you two are the packages, and he's the contents. So go ahead and make him the contents of your package. How would you do that? Do you understand? You're carbon, and Caleb, you're water, and you're going to package up the light. He's the light, and you're the one that's going to package him up. He's the inside of your package. Okay, there we go. Good. And you are now being attached to the water to help him. Okay. So now we have, in this case, we have a carbon and a water holding light. What would we call that? We would call that a carbohydrate. Oh, it's a carbohydrate. That's how carbohydrates are formed. So carbohydrates are a mixture of part air, part water, and hiding inside light. So that sounds like it would be a really good food to eat, a carbohydrate. But it gets such a bad name in the world. Carbs, carbs, carbs. But it is what you need. And we can show that over and over. So if you look at the plants that God created for human consumption in creation, what kinds of food did he assign for us to eat? Only carbohydrates. Interesting. Now, what's another word for carbon? Anybody know? Little quiz. I'll give you another hint. If anyone knows Spanish, the word carbón is the word for charcoal. Charcoal. And charcoal does what? Gathers up, attaches itself to impurities. So carbon, have you ever heard of a carbon filter? Yes, we have all heard of carbon filters. Inside of charcoal is carbon, or a carbon filter. And water, very purifying. Two of the most purifying elements in all the world, attached together. Inside is the light of the sun. Now, what's amazing is when I come to the plant and want to eat, I take my package and I eat. And my body does the exact inverse of what the plant did. So get this, carbohydrate digestion is the inverse of photosynthesis. Right? So what happens is I eat this, break it apart. Water is used all over the body for all kinds of processes, including hydrating and purifying, and it leaves my body in various forms, in my breath, in my sweat, in my urine, and it goes. Okay? So I put him back out into nature, but this time with my impurities. Okay? Now my carbon goes into my bloodstream, goes all the way around, and I breathe in my O2. And my O2 goes into actually visits every cell of the body. And by the time carbon makes its circuit in my body, it comes back to the lungs, reattached to its old friend, the O2, with all of my impurities. And then I exhale carbon dioxide, and you guys go. You have to go together because you have my impurities. And your carbon dioxide. You can't split again until the plant splits you, because you're stuck as carbon dioxide together until a plant would separate you. The plant then repurifies you and presents you back to me. So if the plant is a purifier, and then I take it in and it purifies me, and then I put out my toxins back for the plant. It's a very interesting system, isn't it? It's an awesome system. You can talk to your plant. I sometimes breathe right on my plant. Oh. Yeah, CO2. In some commercial greenhouses, they literally pump carbon dioxide in there to get them to grow more because the plant depends on carbon dioxide. We depend on the O2. Okay, so plant, thank you so much for providing me good food. You can all go back to your seats. Now, if the water went out and the air went out, what's left on the inside when I eat that? The sunlight. The energy from the sun. So I get to eat the sunlight. Did you know you can eat sunlight? So this is actually an amazing system. Oh, this is not going to actually go up, is it? That's okay. That's an amazing, amazing system. So, children, when you say, oh, I wish carbon or charcoal didn't taste gritty and bland, it doesn't. It tastes like mangoes or watermelon. Because it's in there. That's actually the carbon or the charcoal that God originally wanted you to eat. Yeah, you can drink grape juice. The point is, these are actually really, really healing things. So let's just go. Now that we know, I presented a ton of things. Like we could unpack those and break down different segments. One is God created 3 kinds of plants. He created the heavenly things and the things on earth, right? So those are a lot. Did you have my charging cord, Maria? It's not in here? Oh, no. Okay, so maybe we're not going to have it. That's too bad. That's okay. Anybody have a USB-C charging cord? Because that would charge it. It's just simple. Which is standard, brand new Android cell phone charging cord. Yeah, that's what I need. If it's a newer Android charging cable. Okay, so let's review what we've learned so far. In the order of creation, God created the things from heaven that plants would need. In other words, he established all of his blessings first. Then he created the things that would receive and share those blessings. Specifically, the plant. Then he created the things that would be dependent and also receive and share those blessings. So the plant is kind of like this intermediary between the heaven-sent blessings and all those creatures that will depend upon those blessings. And so what do we call the plant? Do we have, anybody have like the cube? Anybody have a cube? We're going to piece it together. It's just ingredients. I have a feeling. Where's the outlet here? That's fine. We'll do it. I've been in foreign countries where there were just shacks, so this is really good. Okay, so Sophia, can you come up and get that on, and we'll get that going. So there's this tree standing between all of heaven-sent blessings and all of those that are going to be dependent. What are the things that are dependent upon the heaven-sent blessings from the tree? There's fish, birds, animals, and people. That's it. And then there was Sabbath. It's actually very, very simple. Creation is very simple. God created his blessings, then he creates plants, then he creates all the things that will eat plants. And that's how he made it. It's really, really simple. So this plant becomes like a meeting place between heaven and earth. This tree becomes a meeting place, like the tree of life. So the way that you saw photosynthesis work is the way the tree of life works. So imagine, in fact, if you go into the men's restroom, I noticed here, next to the sink, it says something. Anybody remember what that verse in the Bible it says next to your sink? Now, the girls don't know, unless they clean the church on off days. But it says basically, in the city, it's a different version, in the city, which is the New Jerusalem, there will be no need for the sun, because the Lamb will be the light thereof. In Revelation, it says 3 times that we won't have a need for the sun, that Jesus will be the sun or the light. So imagine in photosynthesis, a plant absorbing, instead of the energy or the light beams from the sun, they're absorbing the light from God, the glory of God, and synthesizing that and putting it into a package that we can then eat. Then when we eat it, we take in not the energy or life of the sun, we take in the life of God. And therefore, we could live forever. And the Bible says Adam and Eve, even after sin, if they had access to the tree of life, could put forth their hand, eat, and live forever. So that's why God had to remove us from the Garden of Eden. Otherwise, we'd live forever in sin. That's how life-giving God is. That if we were in the presence of a tree that was in his presence and we ate from it, we would live forever. That's very, very life-giving. So that's why we're not there. So instead, we go out of the garden and we get to eat things from pots and things from your patio. And so let's talk about that a little bit. When God created plants in Genesis 1, 11, and 12, he created 3 kinds. 3 kinds of plants. Oh, it just takes time. 3 kinds of plants. We said grass, herb-bearing seed, and the fruit tree bearing fruit. Notice it doesn't say cedar, fern, anything like this. Flowers, it doesn't even mention flowers, shrubbery. So all 3 of those kinds are specific to foods. Those are food plants. So when God is dealing in creation, his attention is on food. When he comes down to assigning those foods in Genesis 1, 29, and 30, he assigns 2 to people and 1 to animals. Which 2 does he assign to people? And which 1 does he assign to animals? Which 2 does he assign to people? I'm giving you a hint. It's in Genesis 1:29 and 1:30. Grass, or the herb, the tender herb, the green herb, the grass, was animals' food. The tree was for, and then we need 1 more. The herb-bearing seed, which is what kind? Grains. So the grains and the fruits were originally, and the nuts, by the way, do you know in some places they used to call nuts shell fruits? Like shellfish? Shell fruits. Dr. Kellogg's wife wrote a book, and she calls nuts shell fruits. Shell fruits. So they could... it could potentially fit into herb-bearing seed, but if you kind of go through the context of the Bible, it seems like it's sub to that, or maybe sort of external to that. And the reason I say that is because, if you want to know the truth on any subject, you have to take all of the verses on that subject and put them together. So let's go really quickly to understand what God's diet was. In the original, we just have herb-bearing seed and fruit tree bearing fruit, and we have the green herb or the tender herb or the grass. We give that, 2 of them to people, 1 to animals. Diet changed when we sinned and we left the garden. And that we see in Genesis chapter 3. We see that he gave us bread to eat. That means we had to start cooking. And he gave us it was actually the herb of the field. So we started eating the greens, or vegetables in general. So in the Garden of Eden, we didn't actually, vegetables, they were for the animals. That's right. I mean, in reality, even if you look at counsels and diets and foods and things like that, it says vegetables must be made palatable, which means it takes effort and skill to make them taste good. Rarely do people like raw broccoli unless there's a really skillful, nice dip next to it. Then what you really like isn't the raw broccoli. What you like is the dip. And most people don't actually like salad. They like salad dressing. It's just the way it is. Now, if you have a really nice salad, and I'm telling you, at one time, I was thinking my wife could start a restaurant with her salad. It was that good. Who gets the credit? My wife. My wife. But how much dressing up does a mango need? None. If you put dressing on it, it makes it worse. Who gets the credit for the mango? The cook? The one who put it on the table? No. God does. She can make it look pretty. That's right. And she can, there's lots of things, and God wants that part of the cooperation. But in reality, the glory goes to Him. So we can see very easily there's kind of a hierarchy of food. Now then, why would God give us greens to eat? Is it because, you sinned, so I'm going to give you greens to eat? I know you don't like it. You really want to be eating the mangoes, but I'm going to give you greens. Is that why? They have nutrients that we can subsist on. That's right. But that's not the reason He gave it. Because we could subsist on the fruits of the trees and the grains and the nuts before that without the greens. So it wasn't for nutritional needs, because He gave us all of our nutritional needs in the garden. There are some medicinal values used like from time to time. They're very powerful for certain reasons. But just for daily food. The reason He gave it to us is because being cut out of the garden, the supply was reduced. And like if in the garden, how often did your fruit go out of season? There was always fruit in season. We see this in heaven, where the tree of life will have 12 manner of fruits, bringing forth a different fruit in its season. Year-round fruit, never needing anything else. But when Adam and Eve sinned, we're told in the book Education that when Adam saw the first leaf fall from the tree, what did he do? He cried. He cried harder than most of us cry for a dead loved one, because he realized the effect, part of the effect of his decision. So he had fall and winter all of a sudden. His fruit trees went dormant. His things stopped producing. So in those years, by the way, when do greens typically grow best? In the winter. When the supply is reduced of the other things, that's when those things thrive. So the issue was actually supply. And we see that in the Spirit of Prophecy. I could show you that over and over. Okay, so he gives them, okay, you're not going to be in my home, which is the Garden of Eden. So you're going to be out on the face of the earth. And because of sin, you're going to get permission now to eat even the animals' food. Can you think of a few stories in the Bible where people ate animals' food? Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the prodigal son. Now, in both of those cases, they actually, in Nebuchadnezzar's case, he had to do that because what? He was very proud. He said, "Who's the Lord that I should regard him? Look what I've done." And then, so he had to leave. He had his own way instead of God's way. Prodigal son is the other one. The animals ate it. That's right. so he went out of the presence of the Father, his Father, out beyond, got so bad that he was tempted to eat animals' food. That humbled him enough to want him to return to the Father. In Nebuchadnezzar's case, he was out there far enough. Did he end up returning to God? He did. So, God doesn't want to make greens taste like mangoes, honestly. Because we'll be fine with it. Instead of thinking, you know what? It might be better to be in the presence of the Father. I'm not saying greens are bad. I'm just saying the greens, actually I didn't. Yes? Good, I'm glad. Yeah, God is so good that he allows us to do that. But if I put, let's just say, I put here on this table two things, here and here. One, I put a bowl of, pick your fruit, any fruit. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's put here, you said mangoes or mangosteen. We'll go put a bowl of that, or put a bowl of raw, pick your grain. Kale, raw kale, or raw mango. Wait, a tongue came out of the mouth there when we said raw kale. I saw it. And then let 50 children in here and say they can only pick from one of the two bowls. Are you worried about losing all the kale? No, you're not. So there's something like intrinsically basic to humanity, the attractiveness of some of these foods that God originally chose. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when we talk about agriculture, then, right away there are three kinds of agriculture based on the three kinds of foods that God made in creation. But almost 100% of the education on agriculture is for one of the three. Like, how many gardening classes have you gone to where they teach you how to grow grains? Like, it's almost non-existent. How many teach you to grow fruit trees? Maybe a few, but way fewer than the ones that are teaching you to grow all the vegetables, right? So there's tons of information out there for you to grow vegetables. It's everywhere. Very little talk how to grow grains or how to grow fruit trees. Very little. And so, just to kind of write that scenario, I want to present to you God's original plan. He actually wants us to learn how to grow grains and fruits. You know that originally the herbs and vegetables were actually wild edibles. They were just growing. You would just go pick them. Like if you go to the Philippines, or if you go to like Burma. Like, I have this friend, he's Korean, and he describes all the food they eat. And he says, we just go down to the river, we pick up all the ferns, we take them back, we stir fry them, we season them, and we have food. We don't grow those. We grow our rice. But our greens, we just go gather. We just go gather them. We know all the plants and what we can eat and what we can't. They're growing everywhere. Now, sometimes, and we live in a climate like this in Florida, or Alabama, or Ohio, there's not year-round greens, and they're not good. But in those tropical places, yeah, there's tons. They just have them. They just go gather them. But there's three kinds of agriculture. So when you think agriculture, don't just think agriculture one thing. Realize that there's three different kinds, and they have three different rule sets. Okay, like for instance, in the Bible it says the wheat and the tares are to grow together. That means you don't weed the wheat field. Should you weed your strawberry patch? Yes. There's two different rules. Different rules for grain gardening and your small fruits or even your vegetables, right? If someone said, hey, you're weeding your cucumbers, it says let the wheat and the tares grow together. No, that rule doesn't apply to vegetable gardening. That's for the wheat or the grain. In grain farming, what you do is prepare deep and thoroughly. You cast your seed, and you wait for the harvest. Does that sound nice? People typically want that same process for their vegetables. They're like, why can't I just prepare, plant, and come back when it's ready? That's not the rules that govern vegetable gardening or fruit trees. But that if you want that scenario, learn how to grow those small grains. That is the rule that governs the small grains. Does that make sense? There's no weeding involved. You prepare deep, you plant on time and in proper spacing and the proper depth, and then you wait for the harvest. Then you harvest and preserve and have enough for all year. That's how that works. And the fruits, same thing. They come in their season, then you preserve for all year. But the veggies are different. They don't preserve as well. Like preserving kale is not normally a thing, right? I'm going to can kale. No. Yeah, some people freeze, but without a freezer, because one day you're not going to be able to buy and sell. And some people say, well, don't bring the time of trouble beforehand. That's true, but we need to prepare still. You could dehydrate the kale. But there's something very, very, very special about greens, okay? Because you maybe think I'm talking down about greens, but there's something very special about greens. Here's one of the very special things about greens. They're always ripe. Here's what I mean. You have a seed, let's say it's broccoli seed. You plant it, it sprouts this big. Can you eat it? Yeah, broccoli sprouts. Some people eat that for cancer. What about a microgreen broccoli sprout? Yeah, what about a baby leaf? Yeah, what if the plant grows up this big and it has no crown on it yet? Can you take the leaves off and eat it? Yes. What if it grows a crown? Can you eat that? Yes. So that's the point. Greens are interesting because they don't really have a ripening time. I mean, we think of it because the crown is full, but you can eat it like at any stage. Fruit, not that way. Grains, not that way. So greenery actually supplies our need for something immediate or like at any time. But that's as a band-aid to the fact that we don't have abundance of grains and fruits. Does that make sense? It's not actually God's ideal. His ideal is grains and fruits. So we can see this if we go ahead. God changed diet after sin. We got to eat the animal's food. Then in Genesis chapter 8, something happens. There's a flood. Diet changes again. What do we get to eat? Animals themselves. Then we go further, and we get to eat humans. We never got permission, but God made himself available as human and as divine, and we devoured him. He says, you must eat my body and drink my blood. So God did not withhold animals' food, animals, humanity, or divinity from us. He gave us everything. But does he want us to devour him every day? He does. But he wants us to devour him in symbols. This is the most understood, and I think one of the most underrated phrases, and yet the most used because it's almost in every church. It says, this do in remembrance of me. What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? Yes, but it said to do something in remembrance. Right. His blood was what? The grape juice, which comes from where? Yes. And then eat the bread, which comes from a grain. And he said to do that so that we would remember him, because that was his original plan. Then he gives us Sabbath, which is to remember creation, his original plan. So remembrance is a big, big thing, communion we do as a ceremony, but in reality what he wants is truly daily communion with us. He wants daily communion with us, not a once a quarter like ceremony, but he really wants day-to-day communion. Okay, so that's kind of like a quick overview. We've seen how photosynthesis works. My daughter's not getting things up, but I'm just going to tell you my number one rule of agriculture, and then we'll go into a little question and answer, and maybe your questions will prompt some of what else I was going to talk about, but I will go a little bit more in the history before I fully open it up to the questions and answers. And that is, my number one rule of agriculture is to plant something that you like. Here's why. You have to labor for it. And if you don't even like it, do you feel like a master or a slave? Yes. So honestly, if you're planting like lettuce and you can just go to Publix and get the same lettuce that tastes just as good, you'll never love God. But if you plant something that you cannot get at Publix, or that when you do get it from Publix, it's unripe or it doesn't taste so good, all of a sudden, what you're growing is like special to you. You know it's going to be good. So when you come home and you haven't tended to your garden and it's something really that you love, when you look at it, you might go and tend to it. If it's just like the same old lettuce that you can get at Publix, you're like, I'm too tired, I'm too busy, I'll just go get it from Publix. See how that works? So number one thing is plant something you love, and that's why I deal with the fruit trees yet. Is that not coming out? You want to switch sides and see if that helps? Oh, you did. Okay. It's not coming on for some. Still should charge, but maybe not. Okay. It's still charging. So number one, plant something that you love. And no one loves going hungry. So make sure it's something that actually supplies your need, right? Need and enjoyment should go together. That's my number one. Okay, so let's continue with history. At the flood, we got to eat animals. I said at the cross, we were able to eat humanity and divinity. But actually, God took a special people out of the Tower of Babel area, which was Abraham, right? And he established his people. Those people became slaves in Egypt because of what? Sin. But why did they go to Egypt? They had their own land. Famine. They didn't have food. They didn't have food, so they went to Egypt to get food. When the famine was over, guess what they should have done? They should have gone home, but they stayed there for 400 years, and they forgot all about God. God trains up Moses in the wilderness, sends him to get his people, and as they're coming out, the first thing he changes is their diet. Now, in Egypt, as he was pulling them out, he actually had a ceremony for them to do. You know what that ceremony was called? Passover. What did they do for Passover? Bitter herbs and the lamb, which was supposed to be an example of their bitter experience being slaves in Egypt. Now, they weren't supposed to enjoy it necessarily because they were supposed to have their boots on their feet, their loins girded, their staff in their hand. They had to eat it in haste, standing, ready to go. And as soon as they ate it, they would leave that situation. So they left that situation, and God gives them something in between where they were and where they're going. That was manna from heaven. He gives them manna. Now, children, if I told you that you had to go out into the yard and pick up your food every day, how big would you like the pieces of food to be? Think about it. If I'm sending you out to your yard and say you can't come in until you have enough food for the whole family, how big do you want the pieces of food to be? Maybe the size of watermelons? Wouldn't that be easy? Just pick up one piece and come on in. Or the size of a loaf of bread? Or maybe even the size of apples. But manna was the size of coriander seed. Tiny. So what does that tell you? God is not most interested in efficiency. We are. They had to get down on their knees. They had to get down on their knees, and they had to pick him up. Pick him up. Little by little. Little by little. So what does that tell you? God is not most interested in efficiency. If he was, he would have made manna the size of watermelons. He could have, because he made watermelons the size of watermelons. He made jackfruit the size of jackfruit. Right, but he made them the size of coriander seed. He actually wanted the time with them. So in your garden, if you expect to just come in, do one quick wave of the wand, and leave and come back and everything's going to be perfect, you have the wrong expectation. God actually cares about the time that you spend in the garden. He doesn't want you to be wasteful, but he wants you to spend some time there. Just like he doesn't want them to go out and be there and not pick up the manna. That would be wasteful. But he wanted them for a certain amount of time there, not just to go grab and go. Now, why would that be? Why would God be more interested in them spending a little time than just to make it efficient? It is. It's communion. It's communion with God. It's communing with God. It's realizing the gift and continuously thinking about who's giving it, where it comes from. And did he make it taste bad? He could have made it taste like anything, right? Manna from heaven? What did it taste like? Wafers and honey. It's really nice. Okay, so he wants us to commune with him. Best thing you could do, in my estimation, for the garden is have a shorter study devotion in the morning and then go spend some time out in the garden. Maybe before the sun is even up. I mean, when light is up, but maybe not the sun is burning on you because it's comfortable at that time of day. And just think about, pray, and be there with the Lord. Then go about your day. I think if you did that, you would enjoy gardening more. I really do. Okay, so we see manna, but then God is taking them to a good land, it says in Deuteronomy chapter 8, and it describes the good land and what their diet would be there. And maybe you haven't thought of this before, but their diet there was the same as the Garden of Eden. You want to see it in the Bible? I don't have my projector up yet, but go to Deuteronomy chapter 8. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 7. Not yet. Anybody have it? 8, verse 7. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you look at those things, aren't those just grains and fruits? Except for honey. And olives, but olives are a fruit of a tree. Yeah, a fruit tree, fruit. So therefore, it's like the same as the Garden of Eden. So the Promised Land, even on earth, was the same as the Garden of Eden. That's amazing. These are figs. So this was my presentation. Is it tall enough? All right. These are figs, and this is a variety that I'm planting this year. It's called Eros Maximus, or Eros Maxima. It's from France. It's a very, very big variety. This is Alex. I'm planting that variety. And so I'm just showing to you that these things, this is called barren. The name is cutting off because your screen is not kind of widescreen like mine. I don't know if I could change that, but this is Catito. Oh, what happened? No. No. It's okay. Try to make I think it's more. Yep. I think you get the point with that. That point is like, oh, it's almost there. It's that physical connection, I think, somehow. Yeah, you can move that over. The thing is, like, if I know my figs by name and I know all the characteristics, then when I'm caring for them, it's a different experience than, oh, I'm just growing a pepper. So rule number 2 is don't just grow a pepper. Grow a specific pepper. Know your pepper. Know the variety. Don't be satisfied with a tomato or a fig or an apple. Like, know your variety. Get to know it. What are its characteristics? It'll make the experience so much more fun. Like, then you'll know when you should plant it, when you should harvest it. You can call it by name. It's really a different experience. So know your varieties. And again, plant something very, very attractive, something that would attract the mind to how good God is. So just going, in the promised land, I'll keep going with this and then we'll turn it over to that. In the promised land, the diet was the same as Eden. That's like a new revelation for some of you. Yeah, it's the same. So what we see is the further man went away from God, the further their diet changed from the original. Like right before the flood was when God said that their mind or the thoughts of men were evil continually. Right after that, they got to eat meat. But then he actually brings them right back around, back home to the promised land. Promised land diet. When they were leaving Egypt, they ate the 2 things that they did not eat in the Garden of Eden, which was the bitter herbs and the lamb. Then when Jesus came, he replaced that ceremony with another ceremony. What was that ceremony? The Last Supper. And what did they eat? They ate the grape juice and the bread, which was, again, the Eden diet. So he constantly is replacing things to the Eden diet. And so one thing I would do is encourage you to plant those things in the Eden diet. For one, because there's a major lack of it. Because most people that are gardening aren't aiming there. And 2, I think you'll actually find more enjoyment there. So the third thing is, I've been an institutional farmer, and one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of schools have good programs. Has anybody heard of like Fountain View Academy? Okay, they had a really nice farm going with a lot of, anybody know? Carrots, that's right. Their farmer had set up a whole system. The children would spend all day weeding carrots, and they made lots of money off of carrots. But the farmer leaves, and the whole system kind of goes back to square one. But if the farmer has a system based on fruit trees, and he leaves, it may take the next farmer time to figure out how to take advantage of what the previous farmer did, but it's not really back to square one. The same thing is true. I always say, I'm going to get old. I'm going to get old. So when I get really old, let's say I'm 97, and I go to my garden, do I want to be plowing and planting every 80 days to get my greens? Or would I like to go see a lifetime of fruit waiting for me. Right? It's an investment of time. So one thing I've learned as a farmer is I have a limited amount of time. And I want to use the time that I have to do the most good, the most long-term good. So if I go today and I need to eat today, I might say sprout something or eat some grain, because you can just take that as it is, grind it up, make bread. You could eat today. You can make granola today. Sprouts, lettuce, you can eat in sprouts. You could eat in 5 days, 7 days, 8 days, depending on which one you're doing. Baby greens, so forth. Lettuce, 35, 40 days. You can be eating. You're eating fresh from your garden. But that's not the long-term solution. The long-term solution is to get to where your food is hanging on a tree. It's just the best way. It just makes sense. It sounds like slavery to tell a 97-year-old go out and replow the ground because, your season is over. Instead, he should go out and say, I'm 97. I've planted this over the last 40 years, 50 years, something like this. And now I'm reaping the fruits of my labor. That is amazing. And that's, Sister White actually says it is an unselfish act to plant a fruit tree. She says because it will feed a future generation. Where lettuce was going to feed you for the next, 80 days. Then it goes bitter. But a fruit tree can feed your children. By the way, a lettuce, go ahead. Okay, that's awesome. So he's saying that grafted fruit trees don't last as long. It could be what they're grafted onto, the rootstock. Okay, so let's talk about fruit trees. Now that I've kind of told you the highest pinnacle is fruit trees. And you see this, by the way. Can I just show you one more thing from the Bible? Because you're going to hear all kinds of opinion, but it's awesome when you see things from the Bible. In creation, we know that God planted a garden eastward in Eden, right? And it says, there he put man whom he had formed, and out of the ground made the Lord God to grow what? This is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 9. Genesis chapter 2, verse 9. That's right. So when God planted a garden in Eden, by the way, sometimes we think the Garden of Eden was the entire earth before sin. It wasn't. It was a specific place. And there, God planted, the only record we have in the Bible is that he planted fruit trees and things that were pleasant to the sight. So flowers, fruiting trees, things like this. So then where were the grains? If they weren't in the garden, where were they? The Bible tells us. Just go back to Genesis 1:29. You can read that.
And God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the surface of the entire earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seed. This will be your food.
Yes. So these are the two kinds of food. My King James says something like this. Yours said, on the entire surface of the earth. This one says, and God said, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. So we see here that the grain, or the herb-bearing seed, was on the face of all the earth. But in this special place, eastward in Eden, God planted a garden. And there he planted these fruit trees. Now we're told that God would meet with man in the garden. That was the meeting place. So this is really important because when we teach our children what it's like to be with God, sometimes we tell them that they need to eat healthy. And so we present to them like raw kale. And we tell them this is what it's like to be a Christian or an Adventist. And they start to think, oh, that doesn't look so good. I'd rather my friends eat more fun things than this. But in reality, it's a step. There's nothing wrong with eating it. I mean, you're not breaking any laws of health or nature by doing it. But if you really want to show them what it's like to be in the presence of the Father, put like bowls of mangoes and strawberries and blueberries and peaches on the table. Because that's what it was like in the Garden of Eden. And your children will have a different view of God. Doesn't that make sense? And it's a more accurate view of God because that's what he did in his garden. Then he put the grains on all the earth, and we didn't even eat those bitter herbs until we left the Garden of Eden. So that's very interesting. So you have these three things, and they're closer and closer and closer to home. So we're not up with this yet, are we? Okay, so we're talking about fruit trees and the grafted fruit trees and how long they'll last. I just wanted to say, what's that? If you can. I mean, it's just the connection is not. We have too many connections in between, I think. It's not totally good. And maybe it's my adapter. I think it's on my adapter. Okay. So let's talk about fruit trees. You said, what do I do? So here's what I do. For one, I'm poor. You know that? Like, I think of it as a blessing because the Lord has helped me to figure out things. So there are different root stocks that you can buy with your fruit trees. And I do not buy a fruit tree unless I know what root stock it's on. So I don't just go buy a peach tree from Lowe's. Because I want to know my variety, and I want to know what root stock it's on. At Lowe's, they'll tell you on the tag your variety. Sometimes they'll tell you what classification the rootstock is on, which is like semi-dwarf or dwarf. And a lot of people want that because they're living in a place where they don't have a lot of land. But here's what I would recommend. Never buy a semi-dwarf or a dwarf fruit tree. If you need a small fruit tree, prune it small. Here's why. Yes. So the way a fruit tree works is they have root stock, and they take a fruiting branch off of a tree, and they graft it onto the rootstock. The fruiting branch determines what kind of fruit the tree produces. So if I put this, like, let's just use Florida King peach, just as an example. I take Florida King peach and I put it on a dwarf rootstock, or a Florida King peach, semi-dwarf rootstock, or Florida King peach on a standard size rootstock. You know, you just might be thinking, I'm getting a Florida King peach. But they're totally different because of the rootstock that they're grafted onto. The dwarf one makes the whole tree dwarf. It's not the Florida King. Florida King could be a big tree, but because it's attached to a dwarf rootstock, it dwarfs the growth of the whole thing. What that really means is your rootstock is shallow rooted and not vigorous and not supplying a lot of nutrients to the tree itself. And so then if you ever run into a drought or a flood or any kind of disease or physical damage, that dwarf tree will have a very difficult time overcoming it because it's lacking vigor. Imagine a person, if you as a, like someone who wanted to help someone with their health, and someone was sick, but they were vigorous. That'd be way easier than if they're sick and feeble, right? So if you have a fruit tree that's both sick, but one is vigorous, you're going to have a lot better chance of overcoming. So that's what you want to do, in my estimation, is never buy anything less than a standard size rootstock. And if you have a small space, prune it small. The roots, by the way, are equally dwarfed. So the root or the tree above ground will look like the tree below ground. So if you get a dwarf tree, it's a dwarf root system, which means all of its roots will be in the top 4 feet, which means it's going to dry out. So you're going to be giving it a lot of water, and that's where it's going to get its food, which means you're going to constantly fertilize. If you get a standard size root tree, its roots can go down 15, 20 feet. In a drought, it's not going to show signs of drought. It can get its food from down deep. And so it's less dependent on you. That's the other thing. Fruit trees are supposed to be an emblem of independence. We see this in Psalm chapter 1. Psalm chapter 1. You want to go see there? Yeah. Psalm chapter 1 tells us a little about a fruit tree. And by the way, the Bible over and over compares fruit trees and herbs, the herb of the field. And it says the herb will wither. The herb will wither away in the day of drought, but the fruit tree will not. So in Psalm chapter 1, it says that the person who the delight is the law of the Lord and meditates in his law day and night. This is in verse 2. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. So the fruit tree here is like an emblem of enduring hard times, not withering under pressure, but the ungodly, get driven away. So the fruit tree is an emblem of perpetuity, eternity. Think of Adam and Eve. Who planted the Garden of Eden? God. Then it says, there he put Adam, whom he had formed. So Adam inherits the garden. He didn't plant it. The fruit trees were there before he was. So all the fruit trees were there before he was and would never die. Therefore, in his mind, they're outliving him. If you've ever studied the Bible about the high priest in the order of Melchizedek, he had no beginning and no end. It's very similar to that by the fruit tree. The fruit tree was there before and after. So that was the aim of God for the fruit tree. So here's what I do. If you plant a seed, the seed for most trees will be a standard size tree. Apples, pears, peaches, plums, you can plant the seed. Right, but even like let's say I take a golden delicious apple that I get from the grocery store, or a gala, however you say it. You can take that seed and plant it, and I will get a standard size apple tree out of that seed. But the kind of fruit, I have no idea. I have no idea. It may be good. It's like having children. It will have some resemblance to the parent, but can make its own choices. We see that in Ezekiel chapter 18, where the child can turn away from the ways of the father, and vice versa. They have their own choice. So that's kind of the way it is with the fruit tree. But I still do it anyway. Here's why. Where did the golden delicious come from? The seed. Have you ever heard of Honeycrisp? Is that a good apple? Is it a patented apple? Yes. Patented. That means, so few years ago, they made it so that you could patent life form. Patent life form, right? So if you can patent life form, that means if you can come up with a unique life form, you can patent it. And then you can be the only one that can generate or distribute that life form. Anyone else that has it needs to get a license from the patent holder, right? It's just like software at that point. So imagine this. The people who came up with Honeycrisp actually had an apple orchard of grafted fruit trees, of known varieties. But one apple fell to the ground really close to the mother tree, so close that it sprouted up and it didn't get pruned off. And then they just assumed it was a part of the big tree. But then when they went to harvest, they saw this other kind of apple. And it was a Honeycrisp. And they could take the apple. This Honeycrisp apple is really good. They patented it, and they made millions distributing it. Because it was so good, there was a demand for it. Every nursery that sells Honeycrisp apple trees have to, or every farm that grows it, has to buy it through them. So they're making loads and loads of money. So if you can come up with a new variety that's actually in demand, that's one of your most amazing financial gains in agriculture. But people are afraid to plant the seed because you don't know if it's going to be good. It might be, but you're afraid. Here's what I do. And I've just started this, so I haven't hit it big yet or anything, and not that I'm even necessarily trying. But I plant the seed. For one, seeds are essentially free. I eat the apple from the store, and I've got 5 to 10 seeds. I plant them. I was going to throw those away anyway. It's cheaper than buying seeds or trees or rootstock. I plant them out. I plant them in little cups in my house first to make sure they sprout. When they sprout, I plant them out. Then I let them grow up. And eventually, if it's a bad one, you think, oh, you wasted your time. No, that's when I graft a good variety onto it. But my rootstock grew in place. And it's a standard size rootstock. The reason I say grew in place, if you go to Lowe's and buy an apple tree, almost every, or a peach tree or any other kind of tree, it's in a pot. Most people tell you when you take the tree, take it out, maybe just scratch up the roots in the bottom and then put it in. Don't do that. Bare root the tree. It sounds like you're going to kill it, but you won't. I promise you won't, unless you plant it at the wrong time of year. But bare root the tree. Look at its roots. The reason is a lot of times when I do that, I find roots tangled, like wrapping around itself because it's in a pot. And so that root is going to get big and just choke the whole tree. It might grow fine for a year or 2 or 3 and then start to struggle. So then what I do is when I plant the tree, I place every root where it should go, down and away from the others. And if there's let's say this microphone is the bottom of the tree, there's roots here, and then roots coming from here, and roots coming from here. I'll take the roots that are at the bottom, and I'll place those, and then I'll put dirt all around it, all the way up to the next set. Then I lay those other roots out and fill it up to the next set. And the trees take off. I should show you my peach trees. They've only been in the ground for 2 years. My trunks are this big around. They're 15 feet high and 15 feet wide. And I've got loads of fruit, 2 years. I think that that's the biggest step forward in teaching people to plant trees is to deal with the roots. But the other thing you're going to see when you unroot or depot the fruit tree is you're going to see that tree came down, the trunk, and it had a root that's about the same diameter of the trunk, but it was cut. It was cut because likely it was grown in the ground in a tree farm. Now they want to either sell it for bare root, and when they sell it bare root, that means that you can buy, okay, so let me back up. when you buy fruit trees, you can buy them bare root or potted. Potted are much more expensive. Bare root, you take a risk because what they're doing is they're pulling it out of the ground and basically taking off all the dirt and then shipping it to you. And it can stay out of the ground for whatever the shipping time is and whatever your handling time is. And when you receive it, it's desperate. You need to get it in the ground. But I'm talking about if you go up to Tennessee and get some of these nurseries, you can buy like fruit trees for like $3 to $5 each, bare root. You have to buy 8 to 10 of them, but still, that's like the cost of one potted. So that's a real jump forward if you just want to start something. You can go to these nurseries, buy bare root. You have to buy bare root right around December or January because they're always taking them up when they're dormant. They're not going to take them up now. So plan ahead if you want. Potted ones you can plant at any time of the year. Okay? So that's the advantage of potted. But either way, that tree farm is growing them in the ground, kind of like tomatoes right next to each other. Then they dig them up, and when they dig them up, they cut that main root. And then they give it to you. Or they put it in a pot, and then they water it heavily, and it establishes all these other small roots. But the original root was that big around, even for a small tree. You know, the tree might be this tall, and the root was that big around. But now what you have are these roots this big around that's left. It's like such a small thing. So if I plant by seed in place, that main root will never get cut. And that to me is worth something. Because the roots will determine the life of the tree. It doesn't determine the fruit, but the life, the vigor. So that's what I do, is I plant in place, and then I graft on. Now, if I want to find out what variety that tree is early, when it comes up and it branches early, I can take one of those branches and graft it onto a mature tree and tag the branch, and it will produce fruit the next year. And I get to see, is it big? Is it small? Is it red? Is it yellow? What is it? Does it taste good? And if it's good, I can just mark that tree and leave it and let it grow up, and it'd be a new variety. And I have a brand new variety. That's awesome. If it's not a good variety, then I take my Golden Delicious or my Gala or whatever I like, and I come over and I cut it and I graft on. So I just put out 200 persimmon trees this spring. The way I did it, similar. It's not exact. I didn't plant them by seed. I could have if I had a source for seed. But we decided to do it a little late, and we didn't have a source for seed. So what I did is I ordered off of these, there's places that will sell bulk trees to kind of replenish forestry. You can buy oaks and maples and pine trees and things like this. So I bought American persimmon trees for $1 each. I bought 200 of them. So if you go to a nice nursery and buy one persimmon tree, it's $85. Yes. Exactly. Okay, so you're like, ooh, yuck, I don't want 200 of those. I don't want 200 of those. I don't even want one of those in reality. I don't really want one. They're not hard to graft if you do it right. I'll tell you what I mean by doing it right. But, so here's the thing. I don't want American persimmon, but a lot of persimmon are grafted onto American persimmon rootstock. So you're buying it anyway. You just don't know it. They graft it and you pay $85. So that's right. So what I'm doing is I bought 200 for $200. I planted them all out. I'm letting them grow this year and get established. I have about maybe 60, Asian persimmons that are already growing, and I have to prune those anyway. So next spring, I'll take my own branches off my own trees and graft them onto the 200 rootstocks. And so for $200, I get 200 trees that would normally cost $85 a piece. Okay, now if you want to look just financials, go try to buy a mature orchard and look at the land cost. Oh, wow. Look at the land cost. The land cost for a mature orchard is huge, almost more than putting nice buildings on the land. And the reason is, if a very wealthy person wanted a building, they could hire the contractor, get it built, they'd be in there in a year or less. But if a wealthy man wants a mature orchard, it still takes time. He can't hurry nature. So if you have a mature orchard, just financially, like God's way is actually be fruitful and multiply. It is the biggest financial investment. From taking land, raw land, and turning it into a fruitful orchard is the best financial investment you could possibly do. In fact, James White, you may not know this, James White improved his properties everywhere he went with planting these kinds of perennial fruits. He actually got audited by the brethren in the church because they thought he was stealing from the church because he was increasing in money. And how can you be increasing with money when all you're doing is going around ministering? It's because he was planting fruit trees, and every time they moved, they would sell their land at a much increased value. And so that was an interesting thing. So there are ways to do it. Figs are a really interesting thing. Like this fruit tree right here, barren, is supposed to be really, really, really good. And this one, as a like 3-month-old tree, just in a 1-gallon pot, would cost $300. Yes, this one. Okay, just a 1-gallon pot, 3-month-old tree from a cutting would cost $300. It's barren. There's lots of varieties like that. This one, so I'll back up. This one, this is Alex, by the way. This is Eros Maxima. This one, Catito. Oh, whenever I get to Catito, it backs out. Okay, it does not like Catito. I get to barren, and it's fine. I get to Catito, and it goes out. Let me exit the slide. Yeah, what's going on? It likes barren. It doesn't like Catito. It likes barren. Okay, barren is the variety you need. Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, it would grow. So the next one is Catito. And the reason I brought up Catito is because about 8-inch cutting, that's just a stick that they pruned off of the tree. They put it on this website called Fig Bid. It's like eBay for figs. And just this last year, that cutting went for over $1,200. There's no guarantee that it will root. I have that variety. But I bought it directly from the source, and I paid $60. Now, that's still a lot of money for an 8-inch stick. But it rooted. So I have a little tree. And the tree would cost $300. So I've already increased there. If I put the tree in the ground and grow it to this big and start selling cuttings, let alone the fruit. We haven't even talked fruit yet. So it's actually, God's ways are better than man's ways. Like, this is what they should be teaching children in high school. That the best way to multiply is to take from God. You take from man, you're a middleman. I mean, one thing we should have learned from COVID is that if you're a middleman, the supplier will fail you. The supplier will fail you. But if your supplier is God, you can still go out and multiply these things. And in a time like that, people are getting more and more hungry, and the food prices go up and up and up. So everyone else is losing because of inflation, but the person growing food is growing with inflation. Exactly.
So how long do you have to wait to start grafting into a tree? How big or mature does it need to be?
It depends on the type of tree, but typically your second year, so you plant by seed, and by 1 year you can graft on. Yeah. Okay, yeah, how do you graft? There's many ways to graft, but you want to say? Yeah, I just like a simple wedge. I like the simple wedge. It's the simplest. I tried to do some complicated grafts, which, fit together in like 4 or 5 different ways and look impressive when you put them together. But just a simple wedge. And what I mean by that is you take your fruiting branch and you shave it so that it's like a wedge. It's like a point on 2 sides. Then you take your knife and you cut the rootstock. You take your knife and kind of walk it down so you're splitting the trunk. Then you take the sharpened piece and wedge it down in there, and it opens up, just the pressure opens that up. And then you tape it all the way up. Yeah, they have to be the same size. Yeah, like the cambium layer. Mm-hmm. Yes. I find that that's a really simple thing. With figs, you can do bud grafting. Bud grafting, or they sometimes call it chip grafting, is if you have a stick or a tree, every bud is like they're all over the place. You can actually cut just a little bit of the bark behind one of those buds and cut it like this, and then cut it off like that. Take that bud out, go over to another tree, cut out the same shape, remove that, slip that in, tape it, and then that bud will put off a branch. That'll be your new fruit. Yes, so with figs, you could have one with like as many as you want, as many chip buds as you want to put on there. It's really amazing. And this kind of thing is not just like multiplying, but it takes a little time and planning and, of course, physical effort. But I really, really wish my high school counselor would have sat me down and taught me this stuff. You know what they were trying to do is push me to become an accountant or a business administrator. So I went to college for international business, and I joined the corporate world. But I really wish I would have started then. My land values have, just in 3 years that I've been in Alabama, have tripled, plus, and that's just the raw land value, plus the improvements I've made to it have made that, it's been kind of the poorest 3 years of our life, but in reality, it's been the most fruitful 3 years of our life, by far. So it's really, 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 and I used to be, a manager for United Healthcare and business intelligence, doing a lot of things, making decent money, but this has been more fruitful by far. Even financially, yeah, but also physically, emotionally, intelligently, spiritually, all these different ways to increase. God increases. We would love that. You're only about an hour and 15 or 20 minutes away, depending on So we are northeast. So we are less than a mile across the border into Alabama from Florida. Less than a mile. Yeah. So let me just show you a few things, because I know there's so much about agriculture that you can't go into everything, especially in this kind of situation. It really doesn't like that. But let me explain this. Here's a quote from Sister White. Oh, you can see that. It says the variety of fruits. Oh, you can't see everything. Let me back out. Can you see it there? Oh, why does it do that? Okay, well, you can see part of it. I'll fill in the rest. It says the variety of fruits, the apples, peaches, apricots, oranges, lemons, and plums. All these are very attractive. and make those who look upon the fruit from the orchards and gardens desire to be in the country where they can till the soil. So, if you wanted to attract people to the country, don't try it with lettuce. Not that you can't have lettuce. You can have lettuce. You know what I'm saying? Does that kind of make sense? I think my battery went bad again. But do it with the attractive things. Lemons and plums and peaches and figs and these kinds of things. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is why God made those things in the first place, because they're very attractive. Amazing. So let me tell you about the citrus real quick. Citrus, here's what I'm doing. I had a neighbor. They had a huge citrus tree, and it was loaded with the most beautiful citrus I have seen. We watched it and watched it and watched it. And soon the citrus starts falling to the ground. They weren't picking it. So I told my family, I said, you've got to go ask them if we can pick their fruit, if they're just going to let it hit the ground. And so they didn't. And then one day, my wife and I were going to drive by there anyway to go to a car shop. So we were in two different cars. We were going to drop one off, and she was going to drive me home. We drove by, and I was like, the tree, this big, and when I say a big tree, I mean, it was like, 15, 18 feet tall, 18 feet wide, loaded with fruit. When I drove by, the tree was gone. And I was like, the whole tree gone? So we get to the auto place. I tell my wife, the tree was gone. She's like, no, you must have been looking in the wrong place. I was like, maybe I was, but maybe I'm just too worried, but I think the tree is gone. So we went back in one car. No, this was picking up. So we went in one car and we came back in two. And then, so she went ahead home, and my little boy and I were there, and we drove really slow. And sure enough, I see the stump. So we drive a little bit further, and there in the ditch beside the road is all the tree cut up. So we jump out. It still had ripe fruit on it. They just threw the fruit and everything. We pick like baskets of fruit, and we take cuttings. And we take it home. The fruit were beautiful oranges about this big, but they taste a little bit like sweet lemons. That's what you have? And it has several seeds in it. But the tree is extremely nice, extremely healthy, and extremely fruitful. Now, you could use it for lemons instead of lemons. Some people do that. But what I'm going to do is, because I know it grows so well there, I'm going to use it for rootstock. So I took all the seeds and planted them out. So I have about 200 right now, maybe by the time I'm done, 300 or 400 of these seedlings that I know grow well in our area. I'm going to plant out 400 satsumas. Well, they're going to be satsumas when I graft. Now, if I tried to buy 400 satsumas, even from a commercial grower in Florida, it would cost me $4,000. But if I prune someone else's orchard to help them out, they may even give me some money. And I could take their cuttings, bring them home, and put them on my free rootstocks. And so instead of paying $4,000, or if I'm buying tree by tree, then instead of being at $10 a tree, I'm more like at $30 a tree, and I'd be at $12,000. So instead of $12,000, I could get paid to do this. It depends on the branches, yeah, the number of branches. So I just grafted for my friend. There's a neighbor of mine, he's about 70 or something, and he has a satsuma tree that got frozen back, and so the thing that's there now is big, but it's all rootstock. It's thorny, and it doesn't produce good fruit. So I just grafted on, I think, 6 branches onto that. That's not many, but 6, and they're all going. So then we're just going to prune everything else off. Yes. So it will become a satsuma tree. Yes. Yeah. When I know for sure my grafts are fully established and that they are taking in enough light from the sun, and sometimes I'll try to do it depending on the variety. Like apples, I would wait till they're dormant to take off that much living growth. So then I would let them go. Now the apples and the persimmons, we talked about the persimmons. The persimmons, what you want to do is make sure that your graft, or what they call the scion, that's the cutting from the fruiting branch, you want to make sure that's dormant. So it's not leafed out yet. So what you do is you go cut those, put them in the refrigerator. Then you want your rootstock to be leafing out. That means the sap is flowing. Then you can cut, do the wedge I talked about, wrap it up, and it takes pretty easily. Okay, the reason... So there's a couple reasons. One, if the tree's really young, it might drop all its fruit. After it gets a little bit older, so yours is the second reason. As it gets a little older, it will start to hold a little bit more and more of the fruit. But likely yours are dropping because they're not getting pollinated. Right. They'll produce that big and then drop. If you take like a fuyu as an example, a seedless fuyu, it's seedless because it's not being pollinated. If that same fruit gets pollinated, it will produce seeds. And it will hold its fruit. Right, so it might be randomly pollinating with a wild persimmon, but if you planted, a pollinating persimmon near that tree, it would hold its fruit, but it would produce seeded fruit. It may be something worthwhile because if it's just dropping everything, seeded.
Oh, my persimmons don't drop all the fruits. I always get lots of persimmons, but the ground will be covered with persimmons that have dropped.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that's so a shame. That's yeah, they're green and they're a fair-sized persimmon.
I know.
Or they'll
get your hopes
drop
up.
various times. And then I thought, well, maybe they're not getting enough water or something too. That might be something.
It's probably pollination.
Pollination.
Yeah. You need a different persimmon tree because the fuyu doesn't produce its own pollen. What kind of persimmon do you have? Fuyu? F-U-Y-U? Haichia. Okay. Wow, great. Oh, yes. Astringent and non-astringent. That's right. Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on, you said take the cutting when it's dormant, put it in the fridge. How long will it stay there until you, do you wait till the season, or do you put it in the fridge just long enough to make it go dormant?
No, so once it's dormant, it is dormant. So you'll wait as long as possible to take the cutting.
And then you put it in the fridge.
Then you put it in the fridge.
And wait till the season comes around.
And wait till the tree that you're going to graft on starts to wake up out of dormancy, then graft on. Yes. Right. Don't just put them in the fridge. They will like dry out. So you need to the reason we put them in the fridge is so that they don't dry out and they stay dormant in a plastic bag. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we put like some paper towel or something in there too, so that, because plastic can, condensation can build up and then it can mold. If you put something in there, and you might have to change that out from time. Your biggest problem is if it molds, but those dormant persimmon cuttings are not that moisture filled as compared to some other varieties.
Talking about persimmons, does that also apply for citrus, where you have to have a dormant citrus? 'Cause
No.
here, like, we don't really.
Yeah, they don't really go dormant.
Yeah.
They're like evergreen. So
Okay.
what you want to do there is just graft in the spring around the time when the temperatures start hitting 80 consistently.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Because what it does is, in that case, you want the tree, putting off its new growth. Not too late when it's already done that and it starts to kind of sit for the summer because it's getting hot. So when it's putting off all that new growth right at the beginning of that stage, when it's warm enough, that's when you want to graft, because that tree will just heal that so easily. It's already in those processes.
Onto a tree that's already full grown, or would you? Do you
Yes.
really have to kind of cut it at the trunk and just?
No.
Okay.
So what I did with my neighbor's tree, it's kind of full grown. I took the low branches, just the low branches, and cut those and grafted mine on.
Okay.
And so they took, then I'll come back and I'll cut all the top out, and then we'll just make sure that those are the 4 main branches. Just like any tree that wants to put suckers up from the bottom, you have to do some maintenance to keep it,
Yeah.
because anything that grows off of any part of that tree except for my grafted branches will be the old rootstock.
Okay.
But it'll be really easy to tell them apart, because one will have thorns in that case, the other one won't. Yes.
Growing the persimmon trees in your place.
We actually moved to this property just 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yes, 3 years ago. We have quite a story for how we. So let me just tell you real fast. So you heard the story today about the hemlock. That was a major change. We were already kind of going down country living. I lived in a skyrise. We lived in Hawaii, working for the corporate world. I put my job on the line and said, I'm moving to the country. I'm going to raise my children in the country, and I'm leaving this job. They said, no, don't do that. Just pick a outer island. We were in Hawaii, right? Pick an outer island. You can go live in the country here in Hawaii. So we actually did that for a year. And I worked from home. And that was a blessing. But after that year, we were sure we wanted to farm. And I can't afford a farm in Hawaii. It's way too expensive. So I told them again, I'm leaving my job because I want to go to the real country and we want to have a real farm. They said, no, don't do that. We'll transfer you to the corporate office. It'll be like a promotion and you can work from home. So we did that. And then after this experience, there was about a year later, my wife came, she had cancer, and she got stuck in Japan for 6 months while me and the 2 girls were at home by ourselves. And I was working the corporate job, doing farming, and my wife was losing all of her hair in a wheelchair, looking like she was going to die. She survived, but then what's interesting is we interviewed for Wachita Hills College, and we were like, okay, we should go do that. But then we drug our feet. And in between, all this kind of thing happened. And so when my wife recovered, we're like, life is just too short. Maria and I almost died. Now you're almost dead. Like, what are we doing playing around? There's no more time to play around. So let's just do what we think the Lord is actually calling us to do. So I literally left my corporate job and we went into ministry. So I became the farmer at Wachita Hills College and Academy. It really was not a good fit. Some of the things that we tried to make sure it was a good fit, and the answers coming back before we went when we got there really weren't, the thing, which was very important to me. One of them was, can my daughters work with me on the farm?
Where is that?
That's in
school?
Arkansas.
It's in Arkansas.
Arkansas.
What's the name of it?
Ouachita Hills.
Ouachita.
Yes. So, we literally sold our farm, sold our tractor. We had an auction. We auctioned everything off, and we put everything in a minivan in a small trailer, and we drove to work for almost no money. Literally, they give you $700 a month. So every month that we were there, we had, academy and college students coming to eat with. We lost money by being there and working. So it's just, you're really just working for free, or in our case, worse than free. And then the girls not being able to work with me, because one of the things I asked them before I went there is, will my girls be able to work with me? And they said, well, you're going to be running students. I said, I know, but you said half the day. So can the other half of the day they work with me? And they said, yes. But then when I got there, they decided to give me students all day. And so I didn't have time for my own children. And I knew that wasn't what the Lord was calling me to. So we left after only a year, and someone heard that we were leaving. We didn't know where we were going to go. A lot of my savings went. I bought my mother a place there, and then someone invited us into ministry on their property because they were going away to the general conference for a 3-year project. And they had 200 acres, 3 houses, and they had started kind of the basis for a ministry, but they said, we want you to come in, run a ministry with your vision, and we'll pay for, there was a whole agreement, but we didn't get it in writing. We were stupid. We were just really naive. So these people went away to the general conference. We took over their property. The things that they were supposed to pay for didn't come in. Meanwhile, it's time, like it was based on agriculture. So we were doing like a health retreat. So we started putting in, 400 blueberries, 200 fig trees, a bunch of apple trees, 600 strawberry plants. We started investing. And we did this for like 2 years. And then with very little notice, the people basically lost their contract with the general conference, came back and gave us 30 days to get off the property. And so we worked there. Now we've worked for 3 years with 0 pay and a lot of financial investment out. So we learned the hard way that life in ministry is not always easy. So after that, we were desperate for our own place, but after us buying a place for my mother and investing in all this ministry stuff that just got, and we were doing long-term investment things we weren't getting money back on right away, and we just lost it all. So we didn't even have enough money for a normal house. But after like almost 4 years of leaving my job, I was 100% sure I wasn't going to make any more mistakes like that. So I told my family, I said, we are going to buy our own place. We're not going to join another ministry or another. We're going to get our own place. If it's 1 acre with nothing on it, that's what we're going to get. And at least we're going to get out of this. We felt like we were in a cycle that we needed to break out of, because when you're living through something like that, it's like constant. Do we continue to invest? Do we get out? So anyway, we just needed to get out. So that's how the Lord brought us here. I probably wouldn't be in front of you today if the Lord didn't do that. So we know all things work together for good. But what we did is we took the little bit of money we had left and we bought 20 acres in Alabama. It was just a hayfield. Had no electric, no water, no septic, no house, just a hayfield 3 years ago. And we got a 10-foot box truck for $1,000. And we put all of our things in it and we moved onto the land. And we lived in our box truck. So we emptied the box truck and that became our bedroom. So the 5 of us living in the box truck, 10-foot box truck, we lived there for 9 months while planting fruit trees and gardens, and then we built our little house. So we have a little house now. We were essentially out of money. We ran out of money before our house was finished. But I was just trying to get a roof over my family's head. That was ours. And without going into debt. And so we ran out of money, and the Lord worked things out. And we finished our house. We've been able to plant, I don't know, maybe 600-700 perennial fruit trees in the last 3 years. And we've hosted probably 250 people. We've had very, very difficult health cases come to us. We had a young lady, 23 years old, who was a lifestyle counselor at Uchee Pines. She had been there for 4 years. She was the one giving treatments to people. But she got very sick. Their medical staff tried to help her. They couldn't. Everything they did, she kept getting worse. So then they sent her to the physicians, and she was getting MRIs, CAT scans, blood work, anything to figure out what was going on with her. They couldn't come up with anything. Everything that they thought they would test for, and it would come back negative. Someone was at our house from Uchee Pines, and we found out about her. And I was telling them about the original diet. I'm like, you guys say the best food in the world is kale and garlic. But that's not what the Bible says. And the person didn't really like that. And I said, Sister White has a lot to say on this point. And I said, I think you should think about this. And they kind of got upset. And I said, look, I'm not trying to argue. I'm just trying to tell you that if you're sending people away unwell without trying what God said, then at least think about it. Because that person coming to a place like Uchee Pines, thinking they're going to get healing, and then they leave not healed, where do they go from there? They've kind of come to the pinnacle in their mind of this kind of healing. And so, they could be going away really hopeless, but there's still hope. And so the person kind of got upset. They were staying with us for a week. They kind of got upset again. And I said, I'm only telling you this because I think there are people out there not being healed that are losing hope. So the next day, the lady brings it up again. And I said, I'm not trying to argue. I'm just trying to tell you that I'm sure there's someone out there needing hope. So she said there is. There's this young lady who's been at Uchee Pines for 4 years, and she told us the whole difficult situation. So she said, so if you're so confident, can she come to your place? And can you treat her? And so we said, yes. So the next Sunday, the young lady came. She was so bad that she was bedbound for 6 months. They were wheeling her to the bathroom in a wheelchair. And she stayed with us for a month and left completely well. And she's still well. And that was a little over a year ago. And she traveled with us to a camp meeting, gave her testimony, and a man, older man, with a very difficult heart situation, was about to go to a lifestyle center. When he heard her testimony, he called us and said, can I come to your place to be treated? So he came, and he stayed in a tent because we don't have facilities. Our house is 24 by 24. It's a one-bedroom house. And she, the young lady, stayed with us in that little house. But he didn't feel comfortable imposing like that, so he stayed in a tent on our property for a month. This is a man from Louisiana. He drove over 10 hours. He ran a company that was making $6 million a year, selling metal buildings like carports and pole barns and things like that. And having a nice home himself, sleeping in a tent in our hayfield in southern Alabama. And after a month being on our property, he went from not even being able to bend over because of what his heart and lungs would do, and not being able to tolerate any heat, to like pickaxing and working and doing gardening things. And we just saw him like last month, so that's been a year since he stayed with us. He's healthier than ever. He's strong. He hasn't had, his doctor told him if he didn't have heart surgery, he was going to die. He hasn't had heart surgery. So the Lord has used us in that way. That's the aim of our place, is to be a place of healing, mind, body, and soul. So our farm isn't just a farm. That's why a lot of the decisions we're making isn't just for money. It's to establish a place where people can come and have that outside health experience. And so that's what we're actually doing. And so, yeah, Pensacola is not that far from us, so we see this as a potential outpost, place where we could come and help people that want to either learn about country living, agriculture, or just a healthy experience in the country. So, any other questions? Gardening? Yes.
Done well with the blueberry plots and everything, but strawberries is kind of beyond our capability right now.
Okay, yes. So my daughter is focusing in on strawberries for this coming year. If you read, there's a book called Small Fruits by James White. I don't know if you've heard that book. It's on the Ellen White app in the Pioneer Writings section. Ellen White Writings app. So if you don't know that app, there's an app for your phone or your computer out there on egwritings.org. You can download the app and get all of her writings. In the Pioneer Writings section, James White shows up and he wrote a book called Small Fruits. What you'll learn by reading that book is that the very first sentence of that book says that fruit, does anybody have it up? Okay, fruit is the most natural and healthful food for man. That's the first sentence, by the way, of that book. The reason that they were doing it, he was saying, because there's this growing interest in health reform, that with the growing interest, there was a higher demand for the articles of food, which are really fruits. And so they started a nursery, James White and Ellen White did, a nursery selling small fruit, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, and grapes. And you could buy from James White grapes by the thousands, plants, strawberries by the thousands, like blackberries by the thousands. So this is a work that we don't hear that they did, but it's a work that you'll see. And this book was both advertisement for those who had not ordered for them, and it also went with people's order when they ordered from them. And so their idea was to get all these small fruits out there so that the people could start eating the things that they were learning. And in there, it's practical. It's not like Sister White's writings where it says, just kind of principle. The reason I say that, she's a prophet to the world, meaning the principles she gives have to be applicable in Africa, Australia, Canada, here. But James White was dealing with, United States, and he was trying to give practical hands-on. So he talks about strawberries, and he says basically do it like corn, which means put it in rows and use like cultivation equipment to keep it cultivated. So I don't know if you know what that means, but what it really is, they were using probably horses, likely. We use tractors. So the way that we do it is we set up our rows the same way we would set up corn, which is all based on the width of your equipment. We plow it up and we plant the rows, perfectly spaced, so that then we can come through with a cultivator, which will get out most of the weeds. Now what they did is in the fall, they would cover the plants with, they call it dressing, forest leaves, pine needles, straw, things like this. And then when the winter's over and the plants want to start producing again, they would rake back that and eventually work it into the soil when they start to cultivate again over the summer. And so that's sort of how they would do it. We started that on our property a year and a half ago and didn't have the best opportunity for success because after we put it in, last spring, my tractor broke. So we put in 750-foot rows of strawberries. So we put in 4,500 strawberry plants. And then our tractor broke. And so I became a tractor mechanic last year. It literally, I had my tractor maybe 5 days last year, and it wasn't consecutive. I would repair it. The first day I'd be using it, another major breakdown. And it literally extended all the way until February. And in February, I finally got it up and going, and it broke last February. So it was 12 months, 6 major breakdowns in 12 months. I had the tractor for 5 good days during that year. And so my strawberries did not get cultivated the way they should. And then now the problem is, because of that, there's this mingling, and I can't just take the tractor through. So Sophia and Maria are reclaiming the strawberries this spring. Sophia is going to replant them in the fall, and then we'll start the process over with hopefully the equipment we need. Yes. Okay, it's called EGW Writings. So if you just Google EGW Writings app, it will take you to a place where you can download that. And then in that, there's a Small Fruits by James White. It's really good. It talks about the raspberry, the blackberry, the grape, and the strawberry. Yes.
So I know you plant them out, but you probably start the strawberries like as seedlings, right?
No. So what we do is we buy our plants from a place called Koppes Plants. That's Koppes. And you need to pre-order really early. Like, call them maybe even about now and tell them ahead of time that you want to order plants. Go to the website and look at it. They sell in boxes of 1,500.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So go into it as a church or something if you don't want to put out 1,500. But the plants are about 10 cents each. So you're going to pay $150 or $170, I think, with shipping for 1,500 plants. So that's like way less than buying 200 plants somewhere else. So get the 15, 100, and sell off in the community. Put it on Marketplace. Be a service to your community and have the extra to sell off at a reasonable price. So that's what we do. We buy from them. So we bought 3 boxes, $170 each. So that was like, $510 or something. And we just put out 4,500 plants a year and a half ago. Now the plants, in a hot place like this, a lot of people don't want to cultivate the strawberries through the summer. So the way most people do strawberries here in the South is they actually plant in October or November. Let them grow, they get a harvest, and then they just plow them under. Plant something else, and then order new plants. The problem with that process is if you get caught at a time when you can't buy or sell, and we don't know exactly when that time's coming, and you're just thinking, well, I'm just going to order my next set of plants, you could then just be without strawberries for the rest of eternity. Well, not eternity, but, here. Yes. They do, and they multiply significantly. As long as they'll survive the winter, so that the summer, I call it the winter in the summer, where it gets so harsh that some plants don't thrive. So when I was in Ohio, everything thrives in the summer. So here, when it gets into the heat of the summer, some plants start to show signs of stress. Strawberries are one of those. They don't love the heat.
So I was talking to the owner of the strawberry farm here, and that's what they do is they just plow them under and they plant fresh in the fall.
Yes.
And what I was told is the strawberries are not the next year's harvest are not as good if you use the old plants. Is that true, or if that's so, can you fix that without having to replant?
Yeah. So the strawberries actually are good if they're well taken care of. I think the second year is even better than the first year. But after about 3 years, it's normal, like commonplace. I think even in James White's book, you need to replant the bed. So a strawberry, although it's a wonderful fruit, it is somewhat high maintenance, but it's so high yielding and quickly yielding You know, it's strawberry is let me talk about this. Strawberry is something people will drive to your farm for. And they'll pay money for it. And if you can plant in October and be harvesting in March, April, May, that's like a quick turnaround. So if someone wanted to get into farming quickly, strawberry is a special thing. So even though it's kind of high maintenance in the way of from May to November to keep the bed going, it still may be worth it. And if not, you can do it like they do it, and that's just every year plant it new. But the only reason I don't like that is because we're trying to plant for independence instead of dependence. We don't want to we want to solve the consumerism aspect of agriculture. What I mean by that is if you pick up a book and reading about agriculture, it keeps like trying to get you dependent upon soil tests and amendments and other things that just turn into consumerism. But for millennium, before all this kind of consumerism happened, people were gardening and supplying tons of food. So we want to kind of fix that a little bit so that we
maintain.
Okay, best fruits to grow, easiest to maintain in your area. I would say persimmons are one of the top notch. And that's because the only thing that I know that really bothers them is this little beetle. And they just bother the leaves. Otherwise, the heat, the drought. Well, Maria picked them off the other day.
But for those little beetles, that they eat the leaves, you can take a bucket of water with soap in it, and if you do it in the morning or late in the evening, you just touch it and they just fall down. That's their defense if they fall.
That's right.
And so they just fall in that water, in that soapy water, and they're gone. You don't have to pick individual ones. Just touch them and touch the leaf or the limb, and they just go right in the water. They automatically do that.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to play dead or something. They fall.
Right.
You know why? We tried to feed those beetles to our chickens.
They won't eat them?
They won't eat them. They'll take them out of my hand and put them on the ground. Take them out of my hand, put them on the ground. And so they assume that if they just fall and play dead, nothing will eat it. But as long as it's alive, they'll play with it. So.
Occasionally too, on my persimmons, I get worms.
Okay.
The webworm thing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and so you can kill them or cut the branch off and, like that. Sometimes they'll eat the fruit or the skin of the fruit. Really, they don't eat the fruit. That's weird too, that they just eat the skin. But anyway, it makes your fruit look ugly, but the fruit's still edible if you want to eat it yourself.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it wouldn't be marketable.
I don't know what those worms are, but
the webworms.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's still a lot of unique pests to this area that I'm getting to, familiar with. We've only been here for 3 agricultural seasons, but I've done agriculture in Hawaii, Ohio, Arkansas, and now here. So that's quite different. Very rocky in Arkansas. Here, I couldn't fill up a bucket with rocks if I had to. And, Hawaii was like a nice rain every day, but sunny every day, never over 90 degrees. Ohio was short, but once things went, wow, they go. And deep, fertile soil. This is different. So we're still learning, but I would say strawberries are good, but they take some effort here. Persimmons are probably really top-notch for low effort, high yield, I think. Figs would be sweet potato. Oh, yes. So outside of the fruits,
okay,
sweet potatoes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The sweet potatoes that I grow, they're purple ones. I had the purple sweet potato salad for lunch. I don't know if you ate any of that.
Was it purple on the outside and inside your sweet potatoes?
Correct.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. I don't know the name of it. My sister brought them to me from Jacksonville, and I planted them. And actually, if you leave any little root in the ground, it will make plants for the next year. Or actually, mine grow in my in my lawn. I put some little scraps in the compost pile, and then they grew out from there. And I mean, you don't even have to plant them. You get sweet potatoes every year.
Yes. Blueberries grow pretty well here. So blueberries are something that's good. Figs would be really good, especially if you get away from the Celeste fig. So Celeste is probably the most common fig because the tree is very vigorous and it puts out a load of fruit. But the fruit is just a little underwhelming. And brown turkey is very common. I think you should get an Adriatic fig, personally, something like Madeline's Green Greek or something like that. It's a fig that when you taste it, you're going to be very happy that you have it. Okay, we have honey fig. On my farm, I probably have right now with my new varieties that I'm putting in, somewhere around, 75 to 100 varieties. So if we work out something, I can probably get you cuttings at the right time of the ones that are doing well and that you like. Yeah.
How do you grow figs to become a big tree? Because every year, every winter time, they die. But I noticed one fig tree in Kathy's place that's grown to be a real big tree. I don't know how that grow like that.
That's true. So there are different varieties that have different growth habits. And so I have this tree called Iraqi. Okay? And I planted, my first year I put 100 trees out, or not 100 trees. It was more like 400 trees, but 100 varieties. Okay? So 100 varieties growing, all planted at the same time and watching them in the same area. Iraqi was my most vigorous. That means it grew the tallest and the fullest. Now, usually when that happens, fast growth tends to be tender and less cold hardy, and it freezes back. But Iraqi was my most cold hardy. That means all the way to the tips of the branches didn't die back. It stayed and it grew right out of the tips of the branches the next year. The other thing is, it was also my most productive. It produced more figs than any other variety. So on those 3 points, that's an amazing fig. The problem is, it's a unique fruit. It's very wet for a fig. You don't think of figs as being wet. Sometimes when these taste the best, they're like totally split open and they just melt in your mouth. So they'll never like be a commercial variety. But what I would do is plant Iraqi and graft onto it. That's what I would do. That way you have a big fruit, because that tree is the best. By the way, Iraqi is spelled with a Q. And if you don't have Iraqi or can't find it, I have 3 of those, well, more than that now. I probably have 5 of those trees going. So we can work out an air layer or something. If you don't know what an air layer is, that's where you put soil and wrap it around the branch. The branch will root. Once it's rooted, then you cut the branch and you have a tree already rooted. Yes. Okay, that's a good question. No. When we moved onto the property, we didn't even have water for ourselves. Like literally, we had no water. We had no well, nothing. So we were going to a state park to shower. We had no refrigerator for 14 months. I mean, we lived like we. Okay, so this is very important. Remember, the Bible says that the plant withered when the sun came out because there wasn't enough moisture. The other gospel says because it did not have depth of root. So one thing that I do is I bought a subsoiler. A subsoiler is an implement that goes behind my tractor, and it's like a shank, a single shank. Sometimes down here in the South, it's not called a subsoiler. Sometimes it's called a ripper. And it's a single shank, literally looking like my arm, except metal. And it goes down in the ground. Mine goes down in the ground about 27 inches. And I plow up the ground very deep. And then I plant. And the first year that we were here, we went 6 weeks with no rain and 90 plus degrees every day. It was so bad that our neighbors, their corn should have been harvested, but instead of harvesting, they just plowed it under. This was just 3 years ago. My neighbor across the street, I found out the following year, he said, "This is the first year in my life I'm not going to grow a garden." And he's like 60-some years old. So I was like, first year, why did you miss now after so many years? He said, because last year was so difficult with the drought, I never want to waste my money again. But that year was our first year on the land here in Arkansas. We plowed deep, in Alabama, we plowed deep, we planted everything. Cucumbers, watermelons, cantaloupes, corn, flowers, like squashes, like whatever you could think of. We were planting, and we were harvesting corn and squashes and cucumbers and watermelons and, all these things right through that drought with no water. No water. So still today, let me see. Oh, I can't get that up, can I? So 27 inches is probably like this. Yeah, a little over 2 feet. Yes, so I have sandy loam over clay. So in some places the clay is almost right up to the surface. In other places I have maybe like 10 inches before I hit clay, but tons of clay. The clay is actually your friend and your enemy. Clay is wonderful because it has water holding capacity, it has nutrients, but it binds together. So if you can break it up, then you're in business. But if you don't break it up, the roots will really go down to the top of that clay and start to do this. So most agriculture is based on a dependent system. So let me just tell you this. Most agriculture teaches methods that will never work when you can't buy or sell. Okay? Which means the way that they do the drip tape irrigation systems, those systems are not durable. They break constantly. And so you're gonna have to get new fittings or new tape, and you'll have to continuously get new supply. And that will not happen when you can't buy or sell. All the soil sampling and the amendments that come from far away will not work when you can't buy or sell. So some people's mindset is, well, then get them in now while we can. And there might be something to that. But in reality, there should be like a way to do it with things that are locally sourced. Let me see. I don't have all of the pictures. Oh, so here's one way to go deep in planting a fruit tree. Because we know the persimmons they're not as sensitive to drought, we got this auger for the back of our tractor from my neighbor. He let me borrow it. And this is an 18-inch auger. But down here in Pensacola, you have a company called Pro Rents. It's an equipment rental place here in Pensacola. And they rent a mini skid steer with a 36-inch auger. Now an auger is, let's see. Oh, that one's a video. An auger is a huge drill, like that. And it will drill, so this one will go like a little over 4 feet deep. And that's a lot of clay. Yes. So we actually do have a lot of clay, but we plant deep so that the roots go deep. Let me see. We have animals. I learned something about animals early on, and that is, here's Sophia and her cow. We learned that when we're bringing people out of the city, some people want to come, and they see the beauty of agriculture. Others don't. So one mother brought her 3 children to our property, and the 17-year-old boy, he was from Jacksonville, Florida. He had no interest in watermelons or gardens. He was thinking, why are you working so hard? You can just go to Walmart and get this. But when it came to the animals, he connected with the animals in a really special way. And one of the things I learned is you cannot get a living cow at Walmart. So, anyway. There's our little house. This is a group from mainly Heartland College who came down to our place in the winter. They helped us with we taught them, and they helped us with some outreach in our area. So we put on a banquet. You see this banquet? We put this banquet on. No, this is in our area. We actually had no money. I mean, literally, like I barely have any money. But I was talking to this young man. He's 25 years old, and we wanted to do some outreach around the holidays. And so I told him, well, the Bible says if you throw a feast, don't call all of your friends. Call, the lame and the blind and the poor and the widows and the fatherless. So I said, let's do that because the Bible says it. God must bless it, right? So we actually rented this hall, and we didn't have very much money. In fact, we didn't even have the money. It had a kitchen back there. And we were making food for the people. What we did, this is a video. I haven't even seen this video. There's music, and that's live music, by the way. So we had these students from Heartland. They came down. What we did is we went to the community and we passed out empty bags, like Walmart bags, with a flyer for what the feast that we wanted to throw for the needy. And we said, we're going to be back here next week on either Monday or Tuesday to pick up bags. If you want to give anything to these people, just fill it in the bag, leave it out on your porch, and we'll pick it up. So we called this hall and told them what we wanted to do. They cut their price down to almost nothing. I mean, we rented this hall for $500, which included the place. It included the tables, the tablecloths, the chairs, the use of the kitchen, and the cleanup. I mean, they did not make any money from us. And then what we did is we went to the whole community, finding people who were sick or lonely or had lost a husband or fatherless or whatever. We invited them to the banquet. Then we make all this food with the Heartland College people, and my wife basically did it. Those pita breads, Maria made from scratch. So we didn't buy anything. We got everything. I mean, we did buy some things, but we made everything. And then we invited the people. And when it was time to start, there was only one person there. But all the gifts that we got, we ended up having to have trailers to move all the gifts that came for the people. So much stuff. And then we ended up having to even donate. I mean, it was literally overflowing. But just like in the story in the Bible, when it was time for the feast and no one was there, and he had to send the servants back out to go tell them, everything is set, the banquet's ready, come on in. We did that. And we filled it up. Right then with people. And so it came. And so the Heartland students were like, wow, the Bible came alive. And they could see that we didn't have anything. This is the barn at Water Oaks Farm. That's the place we rented. There's Maria with her dough for all the pita bread. Yep, there's the raw pita being done. So let's see. I'm going to see if I can find a picture of the fruit trees. I don't know. This laptop is relatively new to me, so I don't have all of the pictures on here. Probably don't. We do have alpacas on the property, and sometimes when we host people, we go under the trees, we have a picnic like this, and so then they get to experience the animals. So these people are from Venezuela. Let's see. This was a different group. This is Heartland. I'm not Heartland. This is Uchee Pines Lifestyle Educator course. So I would teach them agriculture, and they would come to our property, and I would go teach them there, and then they would come to our property. So these are people from Uchee Pines on our property. This is our little house. Yeah. Here's some fruit. What's that? Peaches. Oh, this one's nectarines. That one's from last year. Yeah. They do well. Actually, our nectarine tree produced more than most of our peach trees the first few years. But we have differences in... Okay, so for the first 2 years, I've used no fertilizer. In fact, I know I have pictures on here. It's got to be from, I don't know. Yeah, we've used no fertilizers, but I shouldn't say no fertilizers. Our land was planted in oats and peanuts, and both of those are kind of good for fertilizer. So we tilled those in, and that became fertilizer. This year we're using some of the animal manure, some leaves from the forest, and more of the things you can grow, peanuts and so forth like that. Yes. Yes. So sometimes we mulch, sometimes we don't. It depends on what we're doing. For the most part, the first few years I did not. I think some of the trees would really benefit from it, like the figs as an example. But the peaches, what I've done is cultivate around them. So there's just no grass growing up. And then the soil actually will become like a mulch in the sense that it will become crumbly until the next rain. And so it provides like this air buffer in the top layer. But mulch will keep it damp. Sometimes, depending on what you're growing, if you have high clay, using mulch can keep too much moisture at the surface and get kind of sour. But if you do it right, then mulch is wonderful because it breaks down over time and produces better soil. One thing that I want to make sure I mention, most people don't think about this. They only think about organic material or amendments or fertilizer, and that's because that's what agriculture teaches. But they don't talk about the permanent structure of the soil. So if you have clay, you could add sand. Right? And that would break up the clay. So then you'd have a permanent, more permanent, like better structure to the soil. The inorganic structure to the soil is better. So people that live in sandy areas, they should add clay. I knew a farmer from Korea. He lived in a very sandy area, and he started farming in his dad's backyard. And he would sell the produce. He bought his own property, sold the produce, got a bigger property, sold the produce, got workers, sold the produce, retired in America as kind of a wealthier guy. So I was curious, you've had so much success. How did you prepare your soil? You know what he said? He said, I added as much clay and manure as I could. And that's all he did. Every year, he would just add more clay, more manure. And he was very successful. He started with very sandy soil. So we wouldn't add clay, right? We have abundance of clay. So what we would do is add the sand because we're trying to get the proper structure. So again, I think one thing that we don't realize is that even more so than like fertilizer is getting the proper physical structure of the soil. Because if water and air can flow properly and your roots can freely grow, then you're going to be in really good shape. What agriculture books teaches is don't break up the soil very deep. Take a 6-inch deep soil sample, deal with the 6 inches, put it on drip tape. Basically, you're farming in 6 inches. And that plant becomes very dependent on you to provide everything because it's getting everything in its top 6 inches. So you're running out and buying everything that it needs. We kind of do the opposite. We just go deep, let it go down, and provide as little as possible. And we found that a lot of the things we don't have to provide, it will just go get it. So especially for the fruit trees. Okay, so what we've done is used like a mixture of sand and peat moss. You get it damp, pretty damp. Then we put it on the branch, which is a little tricky because just holding soil in the air. We take saran wrap or plastic wrap and we tie it. It's easiest if you put a zip tie. Some people, what's that? Or greenhouse plastic, any kind of plastic that you have. So we'll zip tie the bottom and we'll try to make like this cup. We'll fill it with that sand and peat moss, damp peat moss, and we'll squeeze it tight and we'll get the top of the plastic kind of tight so that you have this ball. And then we zip tie the top. Then we cover the whole ball in aluminum foil so that the sun won't bake that area. And then you wait about 30 days. You can check it to see if your plastic is tight enough. If it's drying out, you could, figure out a way to add a little bit of water. It doesn't need to be wet. It needs to be just moist, humid. And if it's humid, then your tree will put out roots, and that usually takes 30 to 45 days. And then you can just take the aluminum foil off. If you see roots against the plastic, use transparent plastic. You'll see that. If so, cut the branch and pot that, and you've got a tree. Some people scrape the bark in the area where they're going to put some people actually remove an entire bark section. We've done it without doing any and scraping and they've all worked, at least for fig trees. Any other questions? Yes. Yes. I send my wife out to get them. That's what I do. Do you have a wife? You're in good shape. So tomato hornworms are really bad. Yeah, tomato hornworms are really bad. Now, I will say this. I wish I could show it to you. But you know how the Bible says, give us this day our daily bread? And I don't know if this is going to show. What's that? Or maybe I can change my settings. There's a statement. It says this. It says the earth will not yield its strength when worked by impulse, but needs careful daily attention. Now, the reason I say that is because really our aim in life is to get fruit without working. But God's aim in life is to spend special time with you daily. And so our way, that's why God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways. And so careful daily attention is what God wants. Yeah. That's right, the sweat in the day. Now, it doesn't mean we need to be like coarse or unthinking or working like an ox. He wants us to be elevated and to think and to figure out ways to do things faster. But to just think that we could set something in motion and run away, is not his plan. And so you'll never receive his full blessing that way. Instead, if you can learn to do the little things. So, tomato hornworms. Yeah, you can literally pick them. Look for their little droppings or something like that. And then, even if you can't see it, you know it's there because you see its droppings and they hide really well, then get them. The other thing that I've been told works, but I haven't yet experimented, is baby powder. Baby powder. Just sprinkle it on the leaves. And it's basically, I think most baby powder nowadays is essentially cornstarch. So you might even be able to get it cheaper just by putting cornstarch on the leaves. And I think when it eats the leaf, I think the starch bothers them so much that they actually die. I don't use 7. That's only because I don't really understand totally what it is. And it's one of those things that I'm going to have to depend on long term. And so that's not my aim. For someone else, I know people use it, they get their fruit. For me, I'm trying to establish a system that will work in like foreign countries, because we train people that go to I have a young man going to the Philippines in just a month. And when he was over there, so have you heard with AWR, in the Philippines, they got that rebel group to you've heard about all that? So there's a ministry called Farm Stew that's going to go over there and try to follow up on all that. Yes. Right, they were at AFSI. So the young man that I trained for years has joined Farm Stew, and he's going to go work in the Philippines. But when he was over there with Farm Stew recently, they were trying to show the people how to transplant things for their garden. Well, Farm Stew has a curriculum. And they're like, okay, well, we've got to go to the store and buy the transplants. But there was no store in that area. It's like up in the mountains somewhere. So they didn't know what they were like, well, I guess we're going to have to skip this section in our training. And Stephen, the young man that I was training, fortunately, we trained him to think and to look at what's actually available. And so he was like, no, we don't. What we need to do is teach them how to start their own transplants, because if we can't buy it, they can't buy it. So let's solve the problem. And so he actually did a whole thing on how they could make their own starting bed or starting cups, and how to go gather good soil from the woods that would be good for starting seeds. And then they put seeds out, and then taught them what it would be like to transplant. So that's kind of what we're focused on more than just using 7 or something. Even though I know it works. It does work. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. There's a man who they made a movie about in Japan. They made a movie called Miracle Apple. And it's interesting that they use the word miracle because they're giving glory to God. This man had 10 acres of apple orchard in an apple district, apple growing district of Japan. His wife, though, was getting very sick, very, very sick. And so he just thought in the back of my head, it might be what I'm spraying on my trees. So he cut his spraying regimen down. She got slightly better. So he cut it off. She got better. But then he didn't know how to grow apples all of a sudden, because that's the only way he knew how to grow apples. So he just said, it's either my apples or my wife. So he chose his wife, praise God. And then he went out to try to figure out how to grow apples without those sprays, those harmful sprays. So he went out and he borrowed as much money as he could from Ag Credit because he wasn't getting harvest. And still no apples. So then he started borrowing money from his friends. Still no apples and no friends to loan him money anymore. So he started borrowing money from family. Still no apples. So he got so heavy under the burden, he decided to take his own life. So he went up the back of the hill one night, and he went up and he took a rope and he tried to throw it over a branch and missed. And the rope kind of went down the side of the mountain a little bit. So he climbed down there to get it. And when he was down, he grabbed it and looked up in the moonlight, and there was a tree loaded with fruit. And he was like, what's this tree loaded with fruit up here on the mountain? So he went down. The next day, he wanted to go see that tree. So he goes to the tree the next day, and it was acorns, not apples. But it saved his life because it took his attention away from taking his own life. And he thought, if I could make the soil like it is up here on the mountain, where leaves were falling and it was constantly loose, I think if this tree would produce that many acorns, my apple trees will produce more apples. So the first thing he did, he had been at it for 6 years. First thing he did is he let the land rest for a year. That's interesting because that's what the Bible says to do in the Old Testament. So he let it rest for a year. He kicked his tractor out of his orchard, and he started doing things a little differently by hand. He started planting soybeans around his trees. He started to do some different things. Long story short, he gets to a point where he can get apples, except he can't get rid of one bug. And no one will buy the apples with a bug, especially in Japan, if you know anything about those people. It's like, got to be perfect. So what he did is he went out and he slept under the apple trees, and he literally would watch the bugs. Okay, bug, who are you? Where do you live? Where are you going? What are you up to? And he would just observe the bug. And he watched the bug, until he knew everything about the bug. And so he had an idea. He said, I think I can get rid of the bug if I can spray it at this time with apple cider vinegar, which is just the waste from the previous year. Like if he has any old apples or cores or something, he just saves them. When sugar ferments, it becomes alcohol. When alcohol ferments, it becomes vinegar. Yeah. So it's further down the fermentation process, by the way. So he would take that apple cider vinegar, which was sourced from his own trees, and he sprayed just a light spraying of apple cider vinegar. And it worked. And that year, he had the best apples in the entire place. And he became famous because he can make perfect 100% organic apples in an area where they didn't think he could. And so he became kind of world famous. I mean, more in Asia. People from Korea travel to his 10-acre farm. They come from all over to see this man and to hear his methods. And I wish Adventists would do that because people would come from all over. And so that's kind of what we're after a little bit. Not the fame so much, but the methods that would actually free people. And so he sells apples because they're famous for $20 each. So he's out of debt. And he gets invited everywhere to speak on this thing. So anyway, any other questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. You know, I haven't had as much problem with the persimmons here, at least to this point. I have more problems with plums and peach borers and a little bit of the apples doing some things. So one interesting thing, I could show you. One interesting thing that we do is scrape the tree, any loose bark off of the tree when they're dormant. When they're dormant, like in the winter, when they've lost all their leaves, more toward the end of the winter time, we'll actually scrape off, like exfoliate, a lot of their loose bark, all their loose bark, and maybe even some that's not loose. Then in the spring, when it comes up, it puts on healthy skin quicker and fuller, and it eliminates like host places for bugs and fungus and mold. And so I learned that from watching the way that the Japanese people do their apple trees. They literally scrape the outside bark off the tree. Now, some people have learned that you can just take a pressure washer and spray the trunk, and anything loose will come flying off. So you just have to find the right pressure, especially if your tree is young. But that would be a quick way to do it. It's just pressure wash the loose stuff off the tree. In my peach trees or anything like that, when it has that problem and it's a small thing, I actually perform surgery. I don't let it go. I surgically remove the area, and I go back until I have good bark. And I mean, I started doing it because I lost a tree. It was a small thing. I was too busy. I'm like, oh, that's not going to be too big. The tree will take care of itself. And I lost that tree. So I said, never again. If I lose the tree, it's going to be me doing too much instead of too little. And so I started, every time I see that, I would take, and I would do my surgery, and they would just recover. This one had like that fungus growing down at the root, the base, down under the ground about 6 inches. So I had to dig out, and I took off all the bark up about 12 inches and down 8 inches into one of the main roots and cleaned it all up. And I felt like I was killing the tree. But it's giving me fruit this year, and it's fully healed. So I had a plum tree this year that kind of did something similar and performed pretty major surgery, but it looks like it's doing well. Okay, so it depends on who you ask and what you're going for and what your problems are. So is it beneficial to put hay or mulch around a tree? University of Georgia would say if you're growing citrus, not to mulch the tree, because their biggest issue is getting enough rain. And if the soil is bare, it will drink in the rain quicker, especially if it's broken up. So the ideal situation for a fruit tree, in my estimation, is deep preparation, and then keep the surface of the earth broken up. And we do that based on when the water is there. So when the rain comes, it softens up the soil. If it's too wet and you stir it up, you're going to compact it, squeeze out the air, and it's going to bake really hard. If you don't touch it at all, it's going to be smooth and it's going to bake hard if there's any clay in the surface. So what we do is in the in-between point where it will break up easily because it's wet, but create more like granola rather than these patties, that's when we break it up. Then it will dry like granola, but it will be a sponge, a ready sponge for the next rain. If you don't break it up at all, it'll be smooth. And let's say you only get 1/4 of an inch of rain or something, that rain will come and puddle on the top. And if the sun comes back out, it'll probably evaporate before ever really feeding the tree. So if you can keep that broken up, by the way, there's a quote in the Spirit of Prophecy. It says, agriculture is supposed to teach us how to cooperate with heaven's agencies. Well, we can see in creation, the 3 main heaven agencies are light, air, and water. So if you can learn to cooperate with light, air, and water really, really well, then you're in pretty good shape. So that's what we do, is constantly with the trees, keep it broken up, waiting for the next blessing. When the next blessing comes, it drinks it in, which is like the Holy Spirit, right? The rain coming on the heart, the soil is like the Holy Spirit. It's conviction. Then you've got to do something with that conviction. Otherwise, it hardens the heart, like Pharaoh in the Bible. God would give conviction. He wouldn't do anything, and it led to a harder and harder heart. Can I use Sophia here real quick? Because I think we're getting probably close to the end. We might have a few more questions, but I just want to show you. Can you be a tree? Okay, so you have a tree. Just put your arms like this. Sophia's a tree. Remember I said the tree is almost like a meeting place between God and man. She's taking the light, the air, and the rain, and I'm waiting for the fruit. Well, as a farmer, guess what I bring to the tree? What do I bring to a tree? Care and attention. That's right. So Christ in our heart, he will accomplish what he is intending to accomplish if we regard him, if we care for him, if we fear God and give him glory. But there's something else I'm supposed to bring. And this is a real religious thing that I did not learn as a child. So listen to this real quick. When I was a child, I was told, when I come to church, put on my best clothes, be on best behavior, and bring my best to Jesus. But no one told me to bring my worst to Jesus. Why would I bring my worst to Jesus? Yes, because that's what he bears. He bears our iniquities, our infirmities, which is our sicknesses, our diseases, our sorrows, our pains. And so as a farmer, what we bring is we bring manure, fertilizer. What is manure? It's usually poo or waste. Waste things, scraps, waste. I bring my worst, the waste, and I lay it down at the foot of the tree. And in exchange, I get the fruits of righteousness. So it's a constant exchange with this tree, giving my dung for fruits of righteousness. Giving my dung for fruits of righteousness. And that's what it's supposed to teach us. We don't bring, Paul says, I've lost all things, but I count it all as dung. To win Christ, which is the fruit of the tree. And Jesus died on the tree. That's the point. Yes. So Jesus died on the tree. So we bring this and we lay down our worst. Our worst, our worst. I don't know if it will show up. I hope so. I'd love to show the video for the children. Let's see, just real quick. Hopefully. It would be so good to finish on this point. But if there's any other questions, I'll stay as long as anyone wants to. But let's just see if it will go to here. Projects. Okay, Sophia, you can go down. You were my tree. Is this coming up? What's this part? So maybe okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring it to you. This is a small group. So you might not have the big screen, but let me bring it to you. It's going to work. Yes. But it shows you that Christ went. By the way, real quick, principle of hopefully agriculture. Romans 1:20 says, the invisible things of him. That means the invisible things of God that you can't see are clearly seen. From the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. So this is an amazing principle that God said he made the world to reveal the invisible things of him. So God could have made a world without trees, but he didn't, because there's something about a tree that reveals the invisible things of him. Right? So the things he made, the decisions he made. So same thing in the birds. The birds reveal something about God. Look at this very closely. This is the exchange God wants. Mother bird comes, gives something good. Gives something good, and waits for an exchange. What is that? Parent bird comes and waits for the exchange. It says, himself took our infirmities and bare our sicknesses. Matthew 8:17. Here's the bird giving the blessing and waiting for what? What just happened there? Waiting for, what was, ew. It's eating. So it's kind of gross. It's gross. Sin is supposed to be gross to us, right? The Bible says that it should become exceeding sinful. So nature shows us that the father or the mother bird wants to give its best to its children, and in return takes its worst. And that's what we need to teach our children. Jesus is actually asking. Otherwise, they may become really good at pretending to be holy without ever offloading their burden to Jesus. Right? And so we need to learn that too. We're older children too that maybe didn't get taught that way. I didn't learn that until I was really, really older. But the tree gardening teaches us that too. The plants give us their best. We give them things like dung or dying leaves or dead grasses or sand. We're just giving them what seems like dung in comparison to what we get in return. And so that's a really awesome thing to keep in mind too, is that agriculture is actually a lesson book for teaching us the gospel. And so part of what we do is teach agriculture not just to how to get produce, because there's lots of scientific ways that do that, but also destroy the connection between like the gospel and farming. So we want a method that actually deepens the impression of those two things. And that's why we want to do what we do. Okay, any last questions? If not, it could be personal. We'll hang out for as long as you want. Okay, let's close with prayer. Our Father in heaven, we know the Bible says over and over and over that you want to make us fruitful and for us to multiply. So we're so thankful that you have thoughts of peace and a good end for us. And I pray that today we've learned that being with you is truly fullness of joy. It's like being in the Garden of Eden where everything is just delightful in color and in taste. And so I pray that you'll bring us back to you where we can experience what it's like to be in your presence, preparing to literally be in your presence once again. So I pray that you'll make everyone's garden fruitful, but not so much fruitful as much as a place of true, deep learning and connection with you. And then I know that we'll be fruitful. So we're so thankful for this. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.